Welcome to the Hyperpunk Peaches Best and Worst Albums of 2023. Unlike my LEGO video, which you should check out, I'm not going to be ranking every album I listen to because I listened to 50 plus albums this year. However, I will be discussing my least favorite, my favorite, or any that I just found personally notable. Also, stick around because I have an important announcement to make right at the end. And when I say right at the end, I mean literally the last few seconds of this video. Let's kick this list off with the albums that were straight trash. Although they might not have been unlistenable, they were either extremely disappointing or notably below average. First, we've got The Maybe Man by AJR. I really disliked this album. The album has cheesy beats with self-deprecating lyrics, and overall it's just a horrible listening experience. I feel bad because a lot of my friends really enjoy AJR, but I personally just don't see the appeal. Infamous Minecraft YouTuber Dream also dropped an album this year, and there are actually lines from his album that sound like it could have been straight from Maybe Man. Like, "So now I fear one day I'm gonna disappear. Look in the mirror to make sure I'm still standing here. I've been playing in my head those things I never said, like existential dread." That's a fucking AJR line right there. Genuinely, if this album spoke to you, that's great. I'm not trying to take that away from you, but at least for me, it was my least favorite of all 50 albums I listened to this year. Next up is Coco Moon by Owl City. This is actually probably the worst album I heard this year, but the small amount of childlike whimsy that is still inside of me prevented me from being a total hater. This album has really cringy lyrics, like way worse than AJR's. The entirety of the track Dinosaur Park just made me cringe so hard. Now, when I first listened to this album, my friends had just been calling me a hater for a few days because we had just seen the FNAF movie, so I tried to go into this album with a positive outlook. So instead of finding it cringy at first, I found it weirdly endearing. Then I found out everything that happened with their guitarist, which is fucking disgusting, so now I'm very conflicted. Next up is Guts by Olivia Rodrigo. I didn't realize how many people loved this album. Everyone I know agreed that this was a pretty weak album. I'm not gonna just lie and say that this album is straight trash from front to back. I actually don't hate Get 'Em Back, and I unironically have All American Bitch saved to my saved music. I just feel like she can make so much better than this. Similarly to Maybe Man, I do see how this album could really appeal to someone if they found it relatable, but to me, I was just really bored the whole time. Overall, I'd say that this album was a pretty bad idea. Next up, we have Drake, For All the Dogs. Drake the kind of guy to sniffle and hold back tears if you said that For All the Dogs is a bloated mess. I was actually pretty excited for this album, which is weird because I'm not a huge Drake fan. It had a strong start actually, and seeing that Tizo Touchdown was featured twice really hyped me up. Unfortunately, the album was way too fucking long. This album is like the definition of overstaying its welcome. The longer it went on, I also realized that the only parts I enjoyed were the non-Drake elements. The only song that actually made it to my saved music was Screw the World. Next up we have Phantomime by Ghost. Oh my god, another bad Ghost cover album? Who would have guessed? I'm mildly joking. I'm actually a really big Ghost fan, but that being said, I want to see them make good music. There's no reason to listen to any of their covers when the original is on the same streaming service. It doesn't help that I was in my Iron Maiden era when they released this, and I distinctly remember being in the car with my friend and their cover of Phantom of the Opera came on, and before Tobias even started singing, I thought, what, is this like a bad version of Phantom of the Opera? And it was. Next up is 22 by Supreme Beings of Leisure. I fucking love this group's self-titled album. So imagine how excited I was when I found out they were coming back after 14 years to drop an album. Unfortunately, this album was really mid. This album certainly isn't unlistenable. I really like My Ibiza, and some of the instrumentals are really good, like on It Takes a Girl. But overall, it lacks the drastic musical variety and interesting lyrics of their self-titled album. Like, for example, look at the lyrics from Last Girl on Earth or Never the Same, and then compare them to the lyrics from Female. Next up are the middle of the road albums. These certainly weren't perfect by any means, but they were all worth being mentioned. Let's get this group started with Austin by Post Malone. This is my girlfriend's album of the year. I think this album manages to be fun while still getting into some heavier topics without ever feeling like this is a multi-millionaire just bitching about how hard his life is, which was a complaint I had with Autumn Variations by Ed Sheeran. You can call me biased, but I associate this album with driving around with friends and singing along to Chemical or Socialite. Honestly, this album has no bad tracks, it just doesn't have a ton that stand out. This is truly the most album of the year. Next up is Cracker Island by Gorillaz. This album made me mad. I got it on CD the day it was released, and that was the first time I'd ever done that, and I really regret doing it. This album's highs are high, but the lows are super fucking low. The worst part is all the singles they released before the album's official release were really enjoyable. But then the album came out, and it turned out that for every new gold, you had a tired influencer. For every skinny ape, there's an oil. Gorillaz also felt like they didn't fully buy into the fictional band element, which you could certainly say they've been doing for the past few years. But it was especially painful on this one because it felt like they were trying to recapture the magic of Plastic Beach. The music videos released did tell a story, which was pretty cool, but it was so bare bones that you didn't need to read into it at all. Overall, this album was just a pretty big letdown, but I do appreciate the tracks that were enjoyable. Next up is One More Time by Blink-182. Of all of the Blink-182 albums I've heard, this is actually in my top 3. As you can tell, I'm not a die-hard Blink fan, and I was nervous going into this one because I really didn't enjoy California. I feel they were able to capture the fun of early Blink on tracks like Dance With Me or Turn This Off, but they also acknowledged the ways that they've changed in tracks like Anthem Part 3 and One More Time. However, I do acknowledge that this album can get overly sappy or just feel like nostalgia bait on tracks like Childhood. Overall, solid Blink-182 release. Next up is New Blue Sun by Andre 3000. I will say, just to preface, this is not the kind of music I usually listen to. This is a very new territory that I was just kind of getting into this year, but I did enjoy this album. I chose to save my first listen to this for a card trip, which was a bad idea because it put me to sleep within 4 tracks. However, I've re-listened to it a few times and I love its calm atmosphere. I even love the little details like Andre breathing into the mic. The track titles are also ridiculously fun and give great visual pictures for the music. This next group of albums were all really solid and are worth being listened to multiple times or getting collected physically for all you disc heads out there. Let's get this group started with Welcome Home by Millington. This is a wonderful little pop-punk package of 6 awesome tracks. This EP is honestly a joy to listen to. There truly is not a bad song. Millington is fully aware that their horns are just a gimmick and how derivative the rest of their sound is. But this sound is where my love of music started, so I really don't care. It's not fully ska, it really does feel like pop punk with horns, if that makes sense. But regardless of the genre, the opening of Marion gives me chills every single time. Next up is not a singular album, but instead is an artist. Critter put out so much music this year that they could have made one big album, but instead they just kept doing like kind of mini drops, so I figured I would just slam them all into a big mush entry. Quick best to worst of all their albums they released this year would be Underdog Tale, A Wolf to a Spider, Foolhardy, Poisoner, then Velveteen Rabbit. I found Critter through their promos on Instagram, and I'm very glad I decided to check them out on Spotify. Their music is just like hyper pop candy to me. I fucking love their producer tag. Welcome to the Critternet. It's Critter season. Honestly, it's hard to tell how seriously they want their music to be taken, because the main things they talk about are poor mental health, doing drugs, and fucking guys' girlfriends. It's dumb, it's overly sincere. Overall, if you put on a Critter track, I'll be vibing.
Uzi. Wake up.
Pink Tape by Lil Uzi Vert. This album may be bloated, it may have terrible lines, and overall it might be extremely messy. But this is also the first trap album I ever listened to. This is one of the albums where my enjoyment of it overpowers the popular criticisms of it. I unironically enjoy Endless Fashion. I don't give a shit about the cheesy lyrics. And honestly, I don't give a shit about the Chop Suey cover. I like how terrible it is. I'm sorry I'm taking an extremely defensive tone. I do think that Uzi only cares about the aesthetic of this album and not the lyrics. But this album feels like Uzi is just letting you experience every single part of his brain, whether it meshes or not. And overall, I really enjoyed the experience. Next up is Punk Tactics by Joey V and Bray. This is a solid album from start to finish, although it can get a little bit one note at times. It's easy to see why their singles got big on TikTok. Their lyricism is elevated by their infectious energy. I was really excited for this album because I've been following them since 2022, and it fully delivered on my expectations. Some standout tracks were Beast Boy and Right Now, which both managed to cram the tracks full of references while still being energetic and enjoyable listens. They somehow fucking reference Pokemon, JoJo, and Tyler the Creator back to back, and it sounds kick-ass. Kick into the content industry, please. Next up, Utopia by Travis Scott. This album is neither a great one, nor is it so unpleasant. My opinion on this album has drastically shifted. My first listen, I hated the album due to the new direction Travis was taking not meshing with me. However, upon further listens, I accepted what he was going for, and I viewed the album as a mind-melting journey into a manufactured utopia. However, after sitting on it and spinning the CD a few times, it's just not that great. It clearly draws a lot of inspiration from Yeezus, but that's one of my favorite Kanye albums, so there are no complaints from me there. The opening track of Hyena sets the stage of the album to be this really cool journey into utopia, and tracks like Fiend and Circus Maximus really deliver on this premise. However, tracks like Topia Twins and K-pop don't. Overall, I enjoyed the album, but it's not as great as some people are trying to make it out to be. The top 5. The echelon of 2023. In my opinion, you need to listen to these albums. First up, we have How Do You Sleep at Night by Tizo Touchdown. This album was one of the few albums I listened to back to back the first time I heard it. Although I see why some people cringe at songs like Daddy Mama Drama, I thought the whole album front to back was great. Tizo switches from style to style effortlessly, while still retaining his signature sound. You know what I'm fucking saying. It's Tizo Touchdown. It was also really fun seeing him feature on Drake and Travis's albums this year, but his debut album really does stand alone quality-wise. My personal favorite track is Neighborhood, and I love how he uses sound effects instead of words to complete lines. That said, I have been playing this album a little bit too much, so it's growing a little bit stale for me, so I think I need to go a few months before I return to it. Next up, we have Hell Mode by Jeff Rosenstock. This was my favorite punk album I heard all year. This album brings the heavy emotions I wanted while still offering a more sensitive side. The Future is Dumb really resonated with me, and the sentiment that the rain doesn't fall by the end of the day has continued to stick with me since I first heard it. The album is not afraid to talk about the doomerism of the current state of the world, while also getting into some of the necessary self-improvement that needs to be done. Overall, I loved this album, and I'll continue to have nothing to say. Holy shit. I wrote this to be pretentious, and now I'm cringing at what I wrote. Petrodragonic Apocalypse by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. This concept album of planetary destruction at the hand of man-made gods is kick-ass. In this album, humanity's worship of the motor spirit supercell leads to a catastrophic natural disaster. In response, witches bring forth a Gila monster to resolve the crisis, which in turn either awakens or becomes a dragon that leads to the utter annihilation of Earth. The album does not attempt to be subtle in its criticism of global warming, with blatant parallels between the motor spirit and carbon emissions found on the opening track. This album's description of destruction on a mass scale, as well as the immersion in this hellish world, left me utterly awestruck when I first heard it. Musically, this album may be surface level by King Gizzard standards, with their second release this year, The Silver Chord, having more of their signature stylings, but I think that led to Petrodragonic Apocalypse being a perfect example of less is more. From start to back, the album is a no-punches-pulled thrash album that leaves the listener on a clear, pessimistic note. Even after the dragon's rampage, the motor spirit remains. Holy fuck. I'm a speech kid for sure. In short, the album's really fucking cool. It truly does immerse you in the world it creates, and I love just the conflict between all the gods. In second place, we have Red Moon and Venus by Kali Uchis. This album is both heartfelt and sexy, far exceeding the surface level feelings of lust and diving into the true intimate feelings. The album does this all with not a single hint of pretentiousness and has no qualms being explicit and vulgar. I was first exposed to Kali Uchis through her collab with Tyler the Creator, and this was my first full-length album of hers I listened to. This album is so enjoyable. I once listened to it 3 times in a row. Also, fellas, if you're having trouble finding music that fits the mood, go with this one. Uchis deserves all her roses for this erotic and heartfelt album. Now, before we get to our number 1 spot, I would like to shout out my Cheat album. This is an album I listened to this year, but it didn't come out this year. If we want to do a cheat sheet album, it would have to be Plastic Beach by Gorillaz. However, I did listen to this in the last week of 2022, so if we want to get pedantic, my cheat album would be Graduation by Kanye West. Both are incredible albums. I genuinely can't believe it took me till 2023 to listen to. In first place,
what's the point in building up alone if you can't be happy when it's done?
we have Ballad of Darren by Blur. This album feels like a midlife crisis boiled down into 12 tracks. This is also reflected in the interviews that Damien Albarn gave during his release cycle. This album was so good, especially compared to Cracker Island, which, as discussed previously, really didn't live up to my expectations. So I went into this expecting mediocrity, and that is not what I was met with. Personally, I love that Gorillaz and Blur songs tend to view vibes and emotions as more impactful than lyrical logistics. This album made me feel things no other album this year did. There's so many lines I love, I actually couldn't list all of them. Just some standout ones. Looked in the mirror, saw so many people standing there. When the ballad comes for me, it comes like you. For me, This album is just extremely emotional while not being pretentious and overbearing with its complexity. It just sounds like some sad guys making some sad music. Even the album cover just bleeds melancholy, with you seeing this like crystalline clear water with just like smog and slush in the background. We may have reached the end of the album rankings, but we're not done yet. I wanted to talk about the best and worst CDs of the year. I got quite a few CDs this year. I got One More Time by Blink-182, Ballad of Darren by Blur, Cracker Island by Gorillaz, Red Moon and Venus by Kali Uchis, Utopia by Travis Scott, Pink Tape by Lil Uzi, the Barbie album, Hell Mode by Jeff Rosenstock, Sunburn by Dominic Fike, and How Do You Sleep at Night by Tizo Touchdown. Oh, wait, I can't own that. It never came out physically. Personally, I think the best CD was The Ballad of Darren. This is entirely separate from it being my favorite album. The booklet was worked into the centerfold, which I've never seen a CD do before, and the booklet had illustrations per track. The booklet also included a full lyric sheet, which I like, and you got a bonus poster and a CD sleeve, which is not common practice. An honorable mention for the worst would be Utopia. This is a perfectly fine CD release. The album just has so much more that you could do. There wasn't even a booklet included. But for the worst CD of the year, we have Cracker Island. It's smaller than a standard CD, which means that it's more prone to fall off my shelf. The booklet is perfectly fine, but like most Gorillaz releases, there's no lyric sheet. Also, this is just a personal gripe, but the spine on my copy was a little bit fucked up when I bought it. Overall, just a rather disappointing CD release. Thank you for sticking around. As promised, I have a very special announcement. If you send me a DM on Instagram, I will send you a copy of Peach's 2023 shit. This is just a little mixtape I put together. If you want one of these, there are very limited copies, but it is totally free. Just tell me you want one, and if you're the first 10 to send me a message, then I'll send you a copy of this. It comes with stickers I drew on the CD for what it's worth, so yeah. Hit me up if you want a copy of my Peaches 2023 shit mixtape.